And so it is to the printing press, to the recorder of man's deeds, the keeper of his conscience, the courier of his news, that we look for strength and assistance, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.
Welcome to Odd Reality Radio, the show designed to generate thought through entertainment. Join us as we explore the strange and unexplained, the unanswered, and the unbelievable on Odd Reality Radio.
An error doesn't become a mistake until you refuse to correct it.
Welcome to Odd Reality Radio. I'm Ty West, and today we investigate strange and unexplained cases of people going missing, never to be seen again. Stay close. You're listening to Odd Reality Radio. Now, before we begin the search for missing persons, I'd like to talk Mount Rainier for just a minute. Now, if Mount Rainier sounds familiar, it's probably because it's the site of the famous 1947 sighting of multiple UFOs by pilot Kenneth Arnold. You know, and I guess technically it's also the inadvertent birthplace of the term flying saucers, because after the media reshaped the original quote, the quote by Kenneth Arnold, which was moved like, quote, a saucer would if you skipped it across water, and after so many retellings, it had been cut down to just flying saucers. But, that's not actually what I wanted to share, interesting as it might be. Recently, July 26th, 1981 article from the Toledo Blade newspaper resurfaced, and it tells an interesting story about a husband and wife. When Mike Darland reached the 14,410-foot peak of Mount Rainier on Monday, he thought he was seeing a mirage. Sitting in a lawn chair on the snow was a woman, her face hidden by a ski mask as she sipped a highball. Mr. Darland was pooped from his first climb on the mountain, and ill from the altitude and a fall into a crevasse. The woman beckoned him to sit down next to her in another lawn chair, and even had his favorite drink waiting. It turned out to be his wife, Cindy, who Mr. Darland presumed was back home in Tacoma taking care of their children. Mrs. Darland, 29, had climbed the mountain by a different route as part of a practical joke perpetrated on her 30-year-old husband by a family friend, Tacoma dentist Larry Hagerness. He, Mr. Darland, is one of the macho ex-football-style guys, Dr. Hagerness said Friday. Climbing that mountain was a big deal. He'd never climbed it before. Then he waltzes into the summit and finds his wife. She'd never carried a pack in her life, and didn't like to camp. But she runs, and she's in pretty good shape. It blew his mind. Mr. Darland said that he recognized his wife when she smiled. He recognized my teeth, Mrs. Darland, a dental assistant, said. He asked me what I was doing there. He thought I had taken the kids to the ocean, she said. I just told him I'd walked. He didn't say a whole lot. He said, "That's great," and smiled. That poor guy, I mean, defeated as he might be at the top of the summit, he'd done it, you know, and she did too. And that's, unfortunately, it can be a deflating thing, just seeing as, you know, he trained, he did all of his research and whatnot, and she just walked up the secret easy path up back. Now, I don't know if it was actually the easy path, so I guess I should give her a little bit more credit, but the article continues. Dr. Hedgenes said he got the idea for the joke last winter when Mr. Darland was planning his first Rainier climb. Mrs. Darland left the couple's children with her parents and climbed the mountain with 8 other persons. 7 of them reached the summit, a Mount Rainier National Park ranger said. Mr. Darland climbed with 4 others, 3 of whom reached the top. Rangers confirmed that the 2 parties registered for the climbs, adding that in listing the equipment before the adventure, quote, they didn't mention lounge chairs. Officials said the unusual equipment drew quizzical glances from other mountaineers. Now, that's not surprising because it's not often that you see somebody trekking up a mountain with a lounge chair. But if you do, definitely take a picture and send it to us at info@oddrealityradio. Just like your feedback, your questions, comments, stories of your own, something you'd like to share with us or share on the show. But I think that Mrs. Darland and Mr. Darland should be taken as an example of what kind of a competitive relationship should be, or what competition should be in a relation inside of the relationship. I think that oftentimes we get a bit too competitive with our significant others just because we spend so much time with them, and it's easy to do. I mean, I'm a bit of an ass, I admit, and if my wife ever does listen to this, she's more than welcome to use it against me. Anyway, she and I, we like to scare each other virtually nonstop, and I tend to be the champion at this, and the other night I was trying to scare her. In fact, I'm slunked around the corner. She's up to the left in the kitchen, and I'm just down the hall, and it's all dark in the hall. There's no lights on. She's just got the oven light on in the kitchen, so there's not much light there. Now, she didn't expect me to be jumping out, and I was waiting for her to just walk around the corner. And after so long, I sat in this crouched position. My knees and my legs began to ache, and I couldn't do it very much longer, so I decided I'm just going to pop up and around the corner and boo, ha, here I am, and get her. Well, my depth perception in the dark was not really at its peak, and as I jumped up and out to scare her, I jumped right into, with my shoulder, I jumped right into this decorative half picture frame, half shelf, and I knocked the thing sideways. Luckily, it didn't come off the wall. I was afraid it was going to, and unfortunately, you know, the look of terror that she saw on my face was actually me being afraid that this shelf's going to fall on me, and because the amount of pain that I'm feeling in my shoulder. And it actually added to how much she was scared. I mean, she thought that I was around the corner getting half-eaten by some sort of chupacabra or something. I don't know. But you know, I walked away with one gnarly knot in my shoulder, and it affected my sleep even. And I already am one that doesn't get too much sleep. But there's a new Indiegogo campaign out there that may just have the product that is the solution. And it comes in the form of Sprayable sleep. That's right. After their highly successful 2013 product, Sprayable Energy, Silicon Valley startup Sprayable are back with a new product involving transdermal technology, Sprayable Sleep. It is the world's first topical melatonin spray that helps you fall asleep naturally and wake up refreshed. While melatonin pills have long since been used to treat sleep-related disorders, the makers of Sprayable Sleep claim it has several benefits over the pills. Ben Yu, 22, and his partner Devin Soni, 35, say the effectiveness of the hormone in the pill form could be lost in the digestive process. But this doesn't happen with the spray. Sprayable gives you the exact level of melatonin you need, often 30 times less than you ingest with the pills, and delivers it gradually over time, mimicking how your body naturally produces and uses melatonin. Sprayable sleep puts you in the control of your sleep, whether you're traveling and have jet lag or are working the night shift. Sprayable will help you get the sleep when you want, so you're refreshed and alert when you need it most. Well, finally sounds like I'm going to be getting some sleep. No, but I mean, in all seriousness, if you've tried this sprayable energy or have, contributed to this sprayable sleep, please let me know what you think of it, because if this is something that works, I'm more than willing to give it a shot. Another thing that causes people to lose sleep is when they're out and about in the wild and they come across a plant or some sort of tree that is equipped with natural defenses. Things like poison ivy or poison oak, the really irritating things. Well, there's one more that I recently learned about that makes poison ivy and poison oak seem like Charmin toilet paper. That's right, I'm talking about the gympie-gympie. Now, it doesn't sound like much, but don't let the name fool you. The gympie-gympie is hardly the name you'd expect for a stinging tree. It looks quite harmless too, but in reality, the gympie-gympie is one of the most venomous plants in the world. Commonly found in the rainforest areas of northeastern Australia, the Moluccas, and Indonesia, it is known to grow up to 1 to 2 meters in height. In fact, the gympie-gympie sting is so dangerous that it has been known to kill dogs, horses, and humans alike. If you're lucky enough to survive, you only feel excruciating pain that can last several months and recur for years. Even a dry specimen can inflict pain almost 100 years after being picked. With the exception of its roots, every single part of the deadly tree, its heart-shaped leaves, its stems, and its pink and purple fruit is covered with tiny stinging hairs shaped like hypodermic needles. You only need to lightly touch the plant to get stung, after which the hair penetrates the body and releases a painful toxin called moroidin. Sometimes, merely being in the presence of the plant and breathing the hair that it sheds into the air can cause itching, rashes, sneezing, and terrible nosebleeds. According to virologist Dr. Mike Leahy, the first thing you'll feel is a really intense burning sensation, and this grows over the next half hour, becoming more and more painful. Shortly after this, your joints may ache, and you might get swelling under your armpits, which can almost be as painful as the original sting. In severe cases, this can lead to shock and even death. And if you don't remove all the hair from your skin, they can keep causing this torturous toxins to release for up to a year. The gympie-gympie serves as an unexpected hazard in the rainforest clearings for foresters, surveyors, and timber workers. Even scientists who are aware of the plant's notoriety can sometimes be unsuspecting victims. That's why most professionals do not venture into such areas without respirators, thick gloves, and antihistamine tablets. Being stung is the worst kind of pain you can imagine. It's like being burnt with hot acid and electrocuted at the same time, said entomologist and ecologist Marina Hurley, who was stung during the 3 years she spent in Queensland's Atherton tableland. She was a postgraduate student at James Cook University at the time, investigating the herbivores that eat stinging trees. The allergic reaction developed over time, causing extreme itching and huge hives that eventually required steroid treatment. At that point, my doctor advised that I should have no further contact with the plant, and I didn't object. One of the first people to document the adverse effects of the gympie-gympie sting was North Queensland road surveyor A.C. McMillan, who reported to his boss that in 1866 that his pack horse was stung, got mad, and died within 2 hours. Local folklore is also filled with similar tales of horses in agony jumping off of cliffs, and forestry workers drinking copiously in order to dull the pain. And in 1994, Australian ex-serviceman Cyril Bromley described how he happened to fall into a stinging tree during military training. He was subsequently strapped to a hospital bed for 3 weeks and administered all sorts of treatments that proved unsuccessful. He described it as the worst period of his life, when the pain made him, quote, as mad as a cut snake. He also told the story of an officer who shot himself after using the leaf for toilet purposes. Now, that sounds terrible. This thing, there's videos of it, and if you search on YouTube, just look up the gympie-gympie plant, and you can see there's a guy that actually just rubs the top of his knuckles across one of the leaves of this thing, and within minutes, he's physically ill. I mean, he's vomiting because of the amount of pain, according to him, and this is something that just, I mean, if I'm going to get lost, I definitely don't want to get lost around a gympie-gympie plant because, oh, good God, I'd want to die instantly. I'd be one of the pack horses hopping off a cliff or one of the guys drinking himself stupid to get rid of the pain. But apparently, according to the guy in the video, the locals, they actually use this, basically it's just hair removal strips, these, leg hair removal strips, and that's what removes these painful little buggers in your skin. I just assume not ever find out what that's like. After watching the guy in the video, and I'm a bit of a glutton for pain. Curiosity does get the best of me sometimes, and I would be somebody to be adventurous enough to say that he would try this, but after watching that guy, it's given me second thoughts, that's for sure. Next up, we'll discuss some of the strangest disappearances of people who literally just vanished. Stick around, you're listening to Odd Reality Radio. Now, most of us interested in the strange and unexplained have heard the story of Amelia Earhart, who mysteriously disappeared while flying over the Pacific Ocean in 1937, never to be seen again. And another story that you may have heard, or at least heard the punchline of many jokes with Jimmy Hoffa's name involved. Now, he disappeared in 1975, shortly after federal investigators had discovered that hundreds of millions of dollars had been stolen from the International Brotherhood of Teamsters' largest pension fund. Now, for those of you who don't know, Jimmy was the president of the entire International Brotherhood of Teamsters. So, sounds to me like he disappeared himself. Now, another one that you may not have heard of, but you may recognize, is the Mexican-American lawyer and activist who was also, believe it or not, Hunter S. Thompson's lawyer. a man by the name of Oscar Zeta Acosta. He disappeared in Mexico while traveling in 1974. And he was actually well known as Dr. Gonzo, the companion to Hunter S. Thompson in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which is one of my absolute favorite movies. But speaking of movies, we've got Louis Le Prince, and a lot of people say that Louis Le Prince is the pioneer of the original motion picture. And in 1890, he went missing. Louis Le Prince went missing while riding a train headed in France. He was headed home. He was visiting some family in France, and on a 150-mile train ride in France in September of 1890, he disappeared and was never seen again. Now, there is some speculation that Thomas Edison, the spineless rich bastard, the Belichick, if you will, of inventive age, some say that he is to blame for the disappearance because shortly after Louis Le Prince disappeared, Thomas Edison tried to claim patents on being the father of, or the inventor of the motion picture. So, take that for what it's worth. I already have very little respect for Thomas Edison and what he didn't create. Stamped his name all over. Anyway, another one that is actually kind of a surprising case and sounds like it could be an episode of CSI, but obviously they'd solve it within their 45-minute window. But the disappearance of Harold Holt. And for those of you who don't know, Harold Holt was the Prime Minister of New Zealand. And he went swimming off of the coast of Victoria on December 17th, 1967. And after exhaustive searches, it was decided that he had probably drowned and had been swept out to sea. Now, those are just a few of the more well-known incidents involving people going missing. And these, more specifically, are almost all famous people. One that is not as well-known is the story of David Lang. Now, we're going to start the search for David Lang way back in the year 1880. Shortly before Louis Le Prince would go missing on the train in France, a man by the name of David Lang would become the center of one of the strangest stories of somebody vanishing ever. Now, the story goes that on the afternoon of September 23rd, 1880, on a farm just a few miles outside of Gallatin, Tennessee, a remarkable event was witnessed by 5 people. The farm was occupied by farmer David Lang and his family, his wife Emma, his 2 children, 8-year-old George and 11-year-old Sarah, and their household servants. On that afternoon, the children were playing in the front yard when Mr. and Mrs. Lang came out of their house, and Mr. Lang started to cross a pasture towards his quarter horses. As Lang was crossing the pasture, the horse and buggy of the family's friend, Judge August Peck, came into view on the lane in front of the house. The children stopped playing, as Peck always brought them presents when he visited. Both Mr. and Mrs. Lang saw the buggy, and Mr. Lang waved to the judge as he turned to walk back towards the house. Then, David Lang completely disappeared in mid-step. Fully witnessed by his 2 children, his wife, Judge August Peck, and the judge's traveling companion, his brother-in-law, David Lang had just suddenly ceased to exist. Understandably, Mrs. Lang screamed. All 5 witnesses ran to the spot that they had last seen Mr. Lang, but there was nothing to hide behind or under. The field just contained grass. The adults quickly searched the field, to no effect. By this time, Mrs. Lang was becoming hysterical, and was taken back to the house as neighbors were called with the alarm bell. By nightfall, all the neighbors were involved in the search, and by lantern they checked every foot of the field, stamping their feet to try to detect any holes that Mr. Lang might have fallen into. Nothing was ever found. In the following weeks, Mrs. Lang was bedridden with shock. All the family servants except the cook, Suki, left, were chased away from the farm by the local authorities. The county surveyor confirmed that the field was on perfectly solid ground with no caves or sinkholes. Months after the occurrence, in 1881, Lang's children noticed that the grass on the site of their father's disappearance had grown a strange and yellow color and formed a circle with a 15-foot diameter. Sarah called to her father, and seemingly as a result, both the children heard him faintly calling for help, over and over, until his voice faded away. Mrs. Lang never fully recovered, and there was never a funeral or memorial service for Mr. Lang. Mrs. Lang eventually left the farm and allowed Judge Peck to rent it out, with the exception of the field in the front of the house. That pasture was left untouched as long as she lived. Now, whether this story is fiction or not, it's an amazing story, and for the sake of the man's poor family, I hope that it's just a fictionalized legend, some urban tale that people have, retold over time, but the curiously hopeful side of me somewhat hopes that this is true. Now, the next case is nearly as bizarre as the David Lang story, but this is the case of Martha Wright, who was riding through the Lincoln Tunnel with her husband, Jackson, when they were forced to pull over due to the inability to see because of so much condensation from an earlier rainstorm. When they pulled over, Jackson claims his wife offered to clean the back window as he cleaned the windshield. But when he finished cleaning the windshield, she was nowhere to be found, never to be seen again. Now, two things for me. One, when was it the windshield wipers were invented? And two, did she at least get the window cleaned? Now, all jokes aside, I know that in the first two cases, it seemed rather vague and almost theatrical in this series of events leading up to these disappearances, and especially in the David Lang case. But this next case is very real and very, very bizarre. I'm referring to the disappearance of Teresa Butler. At 10:25 a.m., January 25, 2006, the New Madrid County Sheriff's Department was alerted that Teresa Lynn Butler was missing from her Risco home. Sheriff Terry Stevens said Gary Dale Butler returned to the couple's home on County Road 241 at about 9:30 a.m. Wednesday after having worked the night shift at his job in Blytheville, Arkansas. When Butler arrived home, he found the couple's 2-year-old and 4-year-old children alone. Stevens said when officers arrived at the house, everything appeared in order. As officers processed the scene, they determined that a video game console and camera were missing from inside the house, and a CD player had been removed from a vehicle outside the house. The only personal items missing of Mrs. Butler's were her purse and her cell phone, the sheriff said. Everybody we have talked to said that this is highly unusual as she would have left the babies by themselves, said Stevens. They described her as a good mama. According to Stevens, there were no signs of forced entry at the house. Butler is described as 5 foot 7 inches tall, brown, almost shoulder-length hair, and brown eyes. Now, this next section is a little bit of the same, but it comes from the Charlie Project, which was a website in doing the research of searching for missing people. I was linked to the Charlie Project a couple of times and looked into it, and it's basically just a website designed to help find missing persons. If you are interested in helping in any sort of way, go ahead and check out the Charlie Project and see what you can possibly do. Now, the reason that I'm reading this is because it actually has a little bit more information, at least a little bit more detail, according to the Charlie Project. Now, Teresa is believed to have disappeared from her residence on County Road 241, also known as 8 Ditch Road, just off of Highway 62 near Risco, Missouri, on January 25, 2006. She was last heard from when she spoke to a relative on the phone at 10 p.m. the previous day. Teresa's husband, Gary Dale Butler, came home at 10 a.m. on January 25th after working the night shift, and found his wife was missing, and their 2 sons, aged 2 and 4, were home alone. She has never been heard from again. The family's video camera, PlayStation with games, Nintendo GameCube with games, large maglite flashlight, digital camera, and car stereo disappeared with Teresa, along with her purse and cellular phone, but her wedding rings, black leather jacket, and forest green Jeep were left behind. She normally took off her wedding rings every night before bed. There were no signs of forced entry to the home, and no blood or indications that a struggle had taken place. But a key was found broken off in a lock at the residence. And cellular phone records revealed that a call was placed from Teresa's phone at 3:16 a.m. on the day of her disappearance to a residence in Gideon, Missouri. The man who lived there did not answer the phone at the time. He does not know Teresa or any of her family. After the disappearance, Teresa's cell phone was used to place one more call to Clarkton, Missouri, to a home where 2 elderly women lived together. The women do not know Teresa either and stated that they answered the phone but heard nothing from the other end. Authorities were uncertain why the calls were made. Gary stated that his wife was not having any problems prior to her disappearance, but her coworker stated that she had received upsetting phone calls from Gary's ex-wife. She told her father Gary's ex-wife had threatened her. Gary maintains that the differences between Teresa and his former wife were amicably resolved. It is unclear whether his ex-wife or the phone calls have anything to do with Teresa's disappearance. Teresa's disappearance is considered suspicious, as she has no history of instability or leaving without warning, and it would be uncharacteristic of her to leave her children unattended. Her husband has been ruled out as a suspect in her case. Teresa was employed at the photo department in the Walmart in Dexter, Missouri at the time of her disappearance, and was scheduled to work at noon the day she went missing, but never did show up. Foul play is suspected in her disappearance. Now, before I give my opinion, if anybody does have any information concerning this case, please do contact the New Madrid County Sheriff's Office at 573-748-2516. Now, to me it seems like she was taken against her will, obviously. And it's almost like it was this poorly staged event with this theft of random items, this material crap like a PlayStation with games and a car stereo. But now another thing that originally struck me as odd is that her kids were left untouched, allegedly. So this 4-year-old could have seen something, could have very well seen or heard something, and barring a speech impediment, should have been able to provide some sort of clue as to what happened, right? But then I thought, she got a call at 10 p.m. Her rings, which allegedly she wore all the time, they were off and left behind, and she only took them off at bedtime. There was a key also broken off in one of the doors, and it would have made for easy entry after dark, and knowing that the husband works the night shift, etc., etc., as far as the kids go, they could have been asleep the entire time and heard or saw nothing, which is extra frightening. So as I continued to do this research, the question that gnawed at my brain was, what do you think the motive would be? And that's obviously got to be the question that's causing sleepless nights in the Missouri Police Department. But I think that there's a myriad of possibilities, and one of these possibilities could be related to her photo processing job, and this one's a bit of a stretch, but perhaps she saw something in some of the photos that a local socialite elite didn't want her to see and ended up paying the ultimate price because of seeing something. Now, in all honesty, I don't think that necessarily happened, but what I do think possibly could have happened, and I did read a little bit further, and there are some members of her family that believe that her husband may know more than he's leading on. And in my opinion, there's obviously a large chunk of information being left out altogether. And it's awfully suspicious with the husband in his position. And I really hope that this person, alive or deceased, is found for the sake of closure for the family, because they genuinely do deserve it. But I do think that unfortunately she fell victim to a cluster of negativity, a toxic situation. And honestly, after reading into the kind of person that she was, as far as the news and media and family and whoever was willing to talk was able to say, and at least build up this person, she wasn't a terrible type of person. There was no addictions, there was no money owed or anything like that. So a completely innocent woman most likely lost her life, and that is a terrible situation. So once again, if you have any information, please pass it along. And why don't we pick things back up a little bit with stories of groups of people going missing. These are some of the strangest. Stay tuned. You're listening to Odd Reality Radio. So before we get into groups of people going missing, I'd like to take a second to say thank you for the feedback that we have received. Once again, for those of you interested in sending us feedback, send it to info@oddrealityradio.com. We just got an email the other day from a nice woman in West Virginia, and again, the reason that I'm getting this episode out is thanks to Katrina and her email. So if anybody is responsible, it is her, and I appreciate that. So she sent me this email and actually requested that we do some stuff in her neck of the woods, and I would absolutely love to. Some Mothman and a couple of other things that I have never even heard of. So I'm really intrigued in doing some research and having an interesting episode about some stuff that's completely new to me as well here in the near future. So once again, thank you, Katrina. And if you would like to contribute to the feedback and the evolution of the show, please feel free to send us an email at info@oddrealityradio.com. Now, without further ado, let's get into groups of people going missing. This first story comes to us from the summer of 1971, and it's most commonly referred to as the Stonehenge Hippies. And the story goes that one night in August of 1971, at the mysterious standing stones of Stonehenge in England, an amazing disappearance took place. At this time, Stonehenge was not yet protected from the public, and on this particular night, a group of, quote, hippies decided to pitch tents in the center of the circle and spend the night. They built a campfire, lit several joints of pot, and sat around smoking and singing. Their campout was abruptly interrupted at about 2 a.m. by a severe thunderstorm that quickly blew over the Salisbury Plain. Bright bolts of lightning crashed down on the area, striking area trees and even standing stones themselves. 2 witnesses, a farmer and a policeman, said that the stones of the ancient monument lit up with an eerie blue light that was so intense that they had to avert their eyes. They heard screams from the campers, and the 2 witnesses rushed to the scene, expecting to find injured or even dead campers. To their surprise, they found no one. All that remained within the circle of stones were several smoldering tent pegs and the drowned remains of a campfire. The hippies themselves were gone, without a trace. Now, this one is a little bit along the lines of the David Lang and Martha Wright stories, if you ask me, and it was full of great theatrics and specifically, the witness, but without a name, being a policeman, that adds to credibility of the story and kind of pacifies the skeptic's brain, or at least the gullible skeptic's brain. Now, I don't mean to degrade anybody's opinion of the story. I love it, and I would love for it to be true, but its authenticity is up for debate, and I'll let you be the judge. Just like within this next story, which is probably even more peculiar than this. In November 1930, a man named Joe LaBelle walked into an Inuit village on the shore of Lake Anjikuni in Canada and found himself perplexed. Lake Anjikuni is about 500 miles north of Churchill, and LaBelle, a fur trader, had visited the village many times before over the years. But this time, he found it unnaturally quiet, and for good reason. Not a single person was to be found in this village, nor any animals, pets, or wild. According to the report that LaBelle left with the Northwest Mounted Police, he had gone a few miles out of his way that day to visit friends in the village. LaBelle had initially yelled a greeting from the edge of the village and gotten no reply. A situation that was already strange. He started to check the huts and found each empty. But in a strange way, some had pots of food still hanging above long, cold fires. In one hut, he found some sealskin clothing for a child that was being mended, the needle and thread still in it as if simply set aside. Rifles had been left behind in the huts, still standing by the doors. On the shores of the lake were 3 kayaks, including the village headman's, and they had been abandoned so long ago that the action of the lake waves had torn them up in their owner's absence. But stranger still were 2 discoveries made outside the village. On one side, and about 100 yards from the village, 7 dead dogs were discovered, tied to some tree stumps. A stone cairn grave had opened, and the stones restacked in 2 piles. The body they had covered was gone. Later examination by experts called in by the Mounties determined that the dogs had starved to death, and the village had probably been deserted 2 months previous to LaBelle's discovery, towards the start of the winter, a conclusion that was based on the type of berries found in the cooking pots. Simply put, the evidence seemed to say that the 30 inhabitants of the village had simply abandoned their homes at a moment's notice and never came back. Where they went, and why, has never been determined. Now, again, this is one that I would like to investigate a little bit further myself. I was actually able to find a couple of websites that had somebody who had done exactly that, and one of them was Mysterious Universe, which is also a podcast that I thoroughly enjoy, and if you don't listen to it, I highly recommend you checking it out. Now, one other thing is that they call this the Roswell of the North, as far as I know. This is somehow over the years been manipulated into a UFO story, and I honestly don't see the correlation myself. I think that this is, a group of people that decided to get up and leave, and it's kind of weird that they leave dogs alive, and maybe it was an avalanche. I don't know, and I would love to hear what you think on this specific case. If you know a little more than I do, please let me know. Send it in to info@oddrealityradio.com. So, for our last mystery on this list, it's actually my third choice. Now, when I say third choice, I mean I've researched 24 missing persons cases and kind of whittled them down to a few that I thought fit somewhat well together. And actually, I got down to these last 3 in my groups of people missing, and in both cases of my other 2 choices, the people, unfortunately, they had been found deceased, but they had been found, and their accused killers were in custody, and it all happened within the last 6 months. And I've been researching this stuff for, I don't know, maybe 9 months or so, so I kind of set myself up for that one and not really getting another episode out. So, my fault, and again, I apologize. But, without further ado, let's get into the mystery of the Sarah Joe. On February 11th, 1979, Scott Mormon and his 4 friends, Peter Hanchett, Patrick Wosner, Benjamin Kalama, and Ralph Mala'iakini, were working constructing a house, but the ocean was smooth and the sky almost cloudless. And according to Hawaiian time, things happen when they happen. Yes means probably later, maybe is a nice way of saying probably not, and the weather is good, then work goes into the later category. These 5 men decided to work later and go fishing now. Now, another interesting side note is that on doing some research, apparently back in the late 70s and early 80s, and for some time prior to that, there was immense amount of rain, and it was pretty constant. And so when you did have a break in the weather, you took advantage of it. So these gentlemen, they drove 7 miles to Hana and borrowed a boat, a 17-foot Boston whaler, from an acquaintance. Actually, it was one of the gentleman's brothers. And the 85-horsepower outboard needed new spark plugs. So these 5 men, they bought the spark plugs and installed them. They also purchased some beers, some soft drinks, snacks, and they filled a large cooler with ice for the fish that they hoped they would be bringing back. Now, there's an enormous channel between the Big Island and Maui, and perhaps it's the roughest and most dangerous waters in Hawaii. In fact, as far as the locals go, a friend of mine at work actually confirmed this. He'd recently visited, and the locals said that you don't go there because of the gnarly current. So, flowing next to the Mauna Loa, the world's largest volcano, the water is 17,000 feet deep and has strong surface currents moving swiftly to the southwest. Now, on this day, a low-pressure system had formed near the islands, and it intensified as it approached the channel. But since Hana received no television stations and the radio stations issued weather reports mostly for the western side of Maui, boaters were accustomed to heading out to sea without consulting weather reports beforehand. They simply played the weather by eye. The day that Scott and his friends decided to go fishing, the bay had barely a ripple in the sky, and it was void of all clouds except for a few stray little puffs. Now, by 10 o'clock that morning, the men had the boat in the ocean and motored out of the bay. They were heading straight into an enduring mystery, which would likely never be solved. Now, by noon, just 2 short hours later, after the men put to sea, the wind had shifted to the north and picked up considerable speed. And 2 hours later, gale force winds were whipping up large waves in the channel, and torrential downpour had begun. Residents said later that the storm was the worst one that they had seen in 50 years. A good portion of Hana was flooded, and a number of houses and businesses were damaged by the high winds. 3 boats out fishing that day made it back to Hana just as the storm got really bad. But the Sarah Joe was not one of them. The Coast Guard was notified at 5 o'clock p.m. that the boat and men were missing. A helicopter and a large fixed-winged plane were dispatched to search for the men. But the winds were high, the ocean boiling, and the visibility was very poor. One searcher said that the weather was so bad that, quote, they could have been just 50 feet in front of us and we wouldn't have seen them. More planes and helicopters were dispatched to the hunt, and eventually, over the next 5 hours, 44 planes and boats covered more than 56,000 square miles of ocean. But they found not a trace of the Sarah Joe or her occupants. After 5 days, the official search was called off. The family's friends and neighbors didn't give up. One of the men who continued to search stated that, quote, these were young, strong, healthy guys. They were experienced fishermen and good swimmers. They were all capable and had each other to rely on. If someone had found debris, we would have agreed that they didn't live through the storm, but nothing was found. Nothing. And so we felt that there was still a chance that they were afloat and alive. A fund drive was begun and over $50,000 was raised. It was used to hire commercial boats and private planes to join the volunteers in an extended search. Dozens and dozens of volunteers combed the isolated south shore of Maui on the Hamakua coast of the Big Island in case the boat or its crew had managed to land out there. Absolutely nothing was found that could possibly be related to the Sarah Joe or the men who had vanished with her. A full week after the Coast Guard had given up the search, the volunteers admitted they had no idea what happened to Scott and his friends. While in the area, commercial and private fishermen and boaters kept their eyes for any sign of what happened to Sarah Joe for months after, but no trace was found. The area southwest of the Hawaiian Islands is a vast expanse of empty ocean stretching for more than 2,300 miles. At that point, a small atoll, a group of uninhabited little islands named the Taongi Atoll, is encountered. Considered a part of the Marshall Isles, the islands were little more than a strip of arid land slightly higher than the ocean. A few scrub plants have found a foothold on a couple of strips of land, but none of them are palatable for humans. Now, there's no fresh water. The only inhabitants ever recorded had been a few Japanese soldiers, whom the Allies wiped out in 1944 during World War II. The atoll is far from the shipping lanes, and the nearest land is over 200 miles further west. The area is so isolated that it was under serious consideration of the site of atomic testing. This is no tropical island paradise for anyone. Now, on September 10th, 1988, 9 years later, marine biologist John Naughton and 4 other men went ashore one of these little islands looking for green sea turtles and nesting seabirds. They'd been hired by the government of the Marshall Islands to find a suitable site for wildlife sanctuary. The team had been on land for less than 30 minutes when they spotted something sticking up out of the sand. Upon closer inspection, I'll let Captain Naughton tell the story. And there's another gentleman at the end of this that kind of tacks on some information, and he's a private investigator on the case.
September 1988, I was involved in an international research project in the northern Marshall Islands for the Republic of the Marshall Islands. We were surveying 6 uninhabited atolls in the northern Marshalls, and we look up ahead on the windward side of Sabella Island and at Taongi Atoll, and here's a Boston whaler sitting there on the beach. I go, my gosh. And I saw an HA on the bow, and I just went, wow, I wonder if that's the Boston whaler we were looking for that they never found with the missing guys from Hana. So we went over and started looking around, and I saw the HA and a couple of numbers, but a lot of it was obliterated, and there was a big S on the side, but that's all that was remained of the name. And suddenly one of the Marshallese fisheries guys who was back in the scrub jungle there says, hey, come over here, I found something. So we walked over into the jungle and on the lagoon side, and there's a cairn of rocks, kind of a pile of rocks with a crude wooden cross on it. There were some very curious squares of paper in the cairn of rocks, paper with sort of tinfoil looking centers and a little bit of Chinese writing. It turns out they're Chinese burial papers, and the idea is what they do is they roll them up and light them and then throw them on the funeral pyre of a cremation for money in the afterlife. And we started looking down. Well, that's strange, and uncovered the jawbone, a human jawbone, and I could see there were fillings in it, and it was fairly recent. There was some blonde hair.
We knew there was a grave there, and we knew there was the hull of the boat there. They brought the hull back, they dug up the grave, and they found partial remains. They never found all of the remains. There was also, in the gunnels of the boat, John had taken out some hairy substance stuff and had put it over there on the beach, and the Coast Guard never brought it back. So our idea was to find out what that was and to eventually get Taongi with the idea of doing a memorial there.
Now, these gentlemen, they offer their opinions on what they think may have happened, and I find it rather interesting. So,
and there was all kinds of rumors floating around. People, were saying maybe they were in some deserted atoll, like a Gilligan and a Gilligan's Island. Could it be possible to survive? And quite frankly, some of those atolls you could survive in. It had coconuts and coconut crabs and plenty of fish, so you could survive.
My theory is that poachers from either Taiwan or China found the body, saw that there was some blonde hair there, figured it was a Christian. They gave him a Christian burial, and they didn't have matches, so they put some of those papers in. So it was a pretty kind act, and they were there illegally, probably getting turtles and giant clams. There's a species of giant tridacna clam, and they, of course, wouldn't report it because they were there illegal.
And we began to find that there were reports that people had seen that grave up there, so we wanted to know when. Finally, I talked to one of the crew members aboard the ship we were on, and the crew member said that he had seen that grave about 5 or 6 years before we got to that island. And so then it was a series of discussions with him, and what had happened was that he was a crew member of this government boat, which was essentially a gunboat. And that boat would search the Caroline Islands, which is where Margereau is located in the capital, and would search it and try to find crews of fishermen that were illegally fishing in the Marshallese waters. Well, by gosh, they came up to Taongi Atoll, and there was a Taiwanese fishing ship that was anchored right there in the waters of the lagoon. They went on the island, and that's when the Marshallese guy saw the grave, and he saw the hull. But he never said anything about it. Nobody did anything about it.
Now, is it just me, or is that one guy awfully enthusiastic about the mystery or the conspiracy angle that just doesn't seem to exist to me? Anyway, I'll link the entire video in the show notes, and I highly recommend you check it out. It's a good one. Now, first of all, I'd like to send condolences out to the families of those missing persons. I think it would be probably the hardest thing to deal with. I think, with somebody being deceased and dealing with a death, that's some sort of closure in itself, but a missing person's, that's indefinitely painful, and my heart goes out to those people missing those family members. So, like I said, I'll include links to all the articles in this episode, as well as the video about the Sarah Joe, which I highly recommend everybody watching. There's some really good stuff in there about why they took the trip and what the weather was like, and some really interesting stuff from family members and people that knew these guys personally, and they did a really good job. It's only like a half an hour long. It's a really great little documentary, but I highly recommend you check it out. Well, until next time, thank you very much for tuning in. If you have any feedback whatsoever, hit us up on Facebook and Twitter. You can always email us, info@oddrealityradio.com. Until next time, I'm Ty West. Take care.